Hello, my name's Katie Sando and welcome to the Marketing Forum podcast, where we learn about the professional world of some of my favourite marketers, communicators, creatives and business leaders. In this episode, I am joined by the wonderful Gordon Seabright, Chief Exec of the Creative Land Trust. The Creative Land Trust is a charity committed to providing lasting solutions to London's studio crisis, in that artists can't access studio space anymore, and supporting the creative economy in general. Gordon's career has mainly focused on turnaround and change. Before the Creative Land Trust, he was Chief Exec of the Eden Project, and before that he held commercial director roles at English Heritage and the Royal Horticultural Society. So as you will agree, no doubt he's had a really interesting career. In our conversation, we talk about the importance of marketing in turnaround situations, which is an absolute bugbear of mine. And mostly people in turnaround situations think about finance, but actually marketing is really important. Plus, we talk a lot about brand building, both at Eden and elsewhere, and his response to leading through change. I really hope you enjoy our conversation, and please do check back soon for more podcasts from the Marketing Forum.
So you've got so much experience. I've got so many questions I want to ask you, and but normally
it's your polite way of saying I'm very old.
So much history. So one of the things I think, well, actually, let's start there. So you read history at university, and you moved then from your degree into the what was it, the Heritage Trust?
Well, there was quite a gap. I actually went from university into retailing, and I worked for Waterstones in the early days of the company. I worked with Tim Waterstone, and then Waterstones got bought by WH Smith, and so I moved across to Smiths, and I did a bunch of retail stuff, and then I like airport retailing, and then moved into their head office. So I was actually a retailer for about the first 15 years of my career. And then I moved, and then I finally realized I could do something with my passion for history. And I moved across to English Heritage, and I became the commercial director there. So that was looking after stuff like retail, catering, hospitality, film rights, accommodation, publishing, basically everything that wasn't the selling an entrance ticket.
Cool. And I did not have a clue about your retail experience, but that's interesting. And so it wasn't so much that you didn't want to be in retail, it was more that you wanted to move towards something that you were slightly more passionate about.
Yeah, well, it was time to do something else. And I had been in retailing, I guess, and wholesale for about 15 years. And I'd realized during that time that actually what I really enjoyed was the more strategic end of things. And I was perfectly capable of being an operator. I ran book department at Harrods, for example, stuff like that. But actually being an operator wasn't what I always wanted to do. So I then tried to find a place where I could use my skills for something I cared about, and English Heritage was an ideal thing. But it's also sort of moved me into the not-for-profit sector, and that skill of being I guess a commercial person in a charitable world. That was where I first learned that could be a valuable thing.
Yeah, right. I mean, I don't know. Even now, do you think there's still quite a big gap often in charitable organisations where there's a lack of commercial knowledge?
Funny enough, I think actually charities have such a responsibility to use their money wisely that I often find that people in the charitable world are, every bit as commercial as those in the private sector. I think we tend to exaggerate the gaps between the sectors, and also there's this rather tiresome notion on either side that, either the public sector is completely rubbish and the private sector need to fix everything, or the private sector are completely venal and it's the public sector who are the people who are the force for good. I mean, it's just not true. There's really good skills from all. And the more we can hybridize our leadership in all sectors, then the better, as far as I'm concerned.
I even sometimes question the value of industry-specific experience, because I've seen instances where not knowing anything about a sector, but having experience in, for example, in this instance, it was PR. I've seen somebody step into a space. They did incredible things because they used their knowledge of a completely different, they were able to completely change a PR strategy to enormous success without that. And, you know, again, I think people really want sector experience when they're recruiting. I don't think it always works.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily a good thing to sort of, you know, deliberately go out there and import ignorance of a sector. But at the same time, most skills are transferable, and having fresh perspective is useful. And there are some sectors that are really bad at recruiting from outside. But I think actually cross-fertilization, while unpronounceable, is immensely valuable. And you know, if I thought back, because I've worked in quite a number of charities now, I think, yeah, what do I bring to it that's useful? Well, it's not, when I joined the RHS, for example, another place I worked, I didn't arrive as an expert horticulturalist, and when I joined National Cycling Charity, I didn't arrive as a sport or commuter cycling expert, but I brought transferable skills from other areas, and I'm a sample of only one, but I do think that's useful.
Yeah, exactly. I think I completely see what you're saying, where like importing ignorance, but you know, it's a balance both ways, isn't it? It's people that are engaged with your sector, but also aren't necessarily, just because they've done the exact job before in the same sector doesn't necessarily mean they're going to drive your business forward. So the cycling trust, so is that another example? Because you're a keen cyclist, aren't you?
I am a keen cyclist. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know if I completely
I love cycling. I love cycling, but I wasn't. You know, I didn't enter that job as a passionate and expert cyclist. I'm quite active, so I just like getting about that way. But I still had tons to learn about the world of cycling. I happened to be lucky enough to join the world of cycling at precisely the moment that Britain was entering a cycling boom and winning gold medals all over the place, and cycling was a really sexy subject. I mean, that was kind of dumb luck on my part, but it was great because it meant that I learned about sustainable transport, and also I learned a lot about lobbying, because a lot of what my charity was trying to do was influence policy, and of course the UK has a number of governments now, so I spent quite a lot of time trying to influence policy in London and also Cardiff, Edinburgh and Belfast. And that was great experience that was really helpful then when going on to other charities.
From a personal perspective, at that point when you were in those roles, moving not through those charities as such, but moving into those different roles, what was your personal kind of goal at the time? Were you seeking a specific kind of experience? Were you seeking a specific kind of learning, or was it more just that you were attracted to what piqued your interest?
The biggest thing is the ability to make an impact. I've always been attracted to jobs where you can make a difference, and each place I've moved on to, that's been the biggest single driver. I've got to care about the cause. I mean, I've worked outside the charity sector as well. I ran a catering company for a while, but in general, I need to care about the mission of the organisation. But none of the jobs I've done have been kind of maintenance jobs, if you like. They've all been. There's been an element of turnaround or transformation, because that's what makes it interesting.
How important do you think marketing is in the transformation element?
I think it's absolutely key, because typically in a transformation, well, especially in a turnaround, if we talk about a turnaround, you've got three phases of turnaround as I see it. And there's the bit that everybody thinks is the turnaround, the bit that always gets in the newspapers, which is the financial turnaround. And it's important, but in a funny sort of way, it's the easiest bit, because there's no great secret to the fact that you reduce a load of cost, which sadly generally means people lose their jobs. and you find ways to increase income if you possibly can. And you know, that is, I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's, in a sense, it's quite straightforward. Actually, the real turnaround in an organization comes from changing the way the outside world sees it, and the way that, and the trickiest bit of all, the way that you in the organization feel about yourselves, feel about the organization itself. And those are, well, marketing is a hugely important part of that. And I mean that in a reasonably profound way, not just marketing as in the advertising and the strap lines and I guess the stuff on the surface, but things like the way you communicate internally and the way you present yourself to the outside world, the way you convey the values of the organization. Those are the really important bits of a turnaround, and they are very much marketing driven or related.
It's I totally agree with you that it's often turnaround is seen as a financial process, and but a friend of mine used to work in turnaround, and he always used to say, you know, a monkey can go through and cut costs out from a spreadsheet, but it's knowing where to invest money to then stabilize and grow. That's where the challenge lies. But yeah, I mean, none of it's easy, is it? It's always turnaround's always a tricky scenario.
Yeah, I mean, that's a bit harsh on accountants, really, isn't it? But what they do is a necessary part of a turnaround, or indeed a transformation. But it's necessary, but it's not sufficient.
This is a marketing podcast. If we can't be harsh on accountants, then the only other victim around here is lawyers.
Don't forget the HR department.
Yeah, swines. So talk to me about Eden. So what was the state of play at Eden when you arrived?
I joined Eden in 2014. And I did go in to tackle a turnaround situation, and the turnaround was already underway. So I think, you know, it's widely known that Eden kind of hit the rocks in 2012-13, and there was a sort of perfect storm of negatives that hit at the same time, which was, you know, reduction in the amount of tourism outside London with the Olympics, and weather was against the place. And that was, on the surface, that's the problem, but actually that stuff only hits you if there's some underlying problems as well. And so the debts are built up, and the way the outside world was looking at Eden, in particular the Cornish community were looking at Eden, wasn't what you would hope for. And that's why I had the chance to go in and get stuck in. But as I say, the turnaround had already begun, because the financial bit, the first hard bits of financial, the cuts, they'd already been done in 2013. So there'd been the big wave of redundancies that everybody knows about. From where I arrived, I was in the position that my focus could be financially. My focus could be on growth. So building from the platform that we had and increasing the top line while holding the cost down, so that, stated blindingly obvious, the bottom line increased. And we started chipping away at the debt that had built up over the years. It was carrying quite a lot of debt, more than you're comfortable with, given that it's a charity and charity shouldn't carry debt. So the first job was to start chipping away at that, which is why some really basic stuff like focusing on an agreed strategy came into play. You know, Eden had always had a purpose. I mean, Eden really is a place with a very clear purpose, but it hadn't actually had a formal strategy laid out. So laying that out, and then sticking with it was a really important part, making sure that everybody in the organization knew what it was and why it mattered. And people were totally up for having a clear direction on that, because, of course, the place, you know, it's quite a trauma to go through the financial part of a turnaround. it's quite then positive when there's a clear direction coming on. And it really was, it's a group of people who really wanted to crack on.
What kind of not talking about marketing for a second, but in practical terms, what did you guys build into that strategy?
We had a sort of graphic that we used that talked about, well, what are the foundation pieces? So what over the next 5 years or so do we do with the basics of how we do business? Like our finance and our HR and our legal and our IT and stuff like that. And then at the top, a sort of the thing that we're aiming for, which is delivery of a mission, and we put into words precisely what it was that we wanted to be achieving. And then there were a set of pillars, and each pillar was, if you like, a work stream. There was an area where, so like Eden because it's such a complex place and it has so many functions, we should sort of break it down to Eden as a visitor attraction, Eden as a place of education, Eden as a place of science, all that sort of thing. And each of those had a load of work plans behind it that just on a page said, well, this is what we're seeking to achieve in this area. This is, these are the dependencies, the accountabilities, the risks, rough timescales, rough order of magnitude costs. So we could work our way through that. And the vision there was that if you do all that right, then it kind of buys you the opportunity to do all that fun stuff that you then hear about. And it's a joy now to, you see in the papers that, the talk of other Edens, like Eden in the north of England. You're kind of building that on this foundation because everybody's put in this hard work to do the basics and get the business in really good shape. That was what people worked really hard on. So that's the kind of foundation, leaving aside the marketing aspects of it.
And I've been talking a lot about strategy at the moment on the podcast, actually. And one of the areas I'm curious in is, when you were pulling that strategy together, did you use external consultants, or did you guys manage that process in-house completely?
I've done it both ways at Eden, one much more successfully than the other. So actually, the really effective and successful strategy we did ourselves. And we followed really basic and well understood classic business school bunch of tools. There's nothing especially clever about it, but it gave us a process that meant that we didn't miss anything out. And that was done in-house by the team. Now, it took longer as a result. It took quite a while because it was sort of an unfamiliar way of working. And also, it's a big place with a lot of very clever people. And it was important to have everybody aligned on it. A few years later, I went back and actually then worked up a follow-up strategy in a different way using an external consultant. And on that occasion, and again, it's a sample of one, it didn't work. It didn't work because that person simply couldn't have the level of understanding of the culture and values of the business that were important, not to deliver a good bit of paper, but to get everybody aligned around it. And I've had that in mind then coming into my new organization, where I've written a strategy with the team, and again, it's all homemade because my experience is, this stuff, and you actually don't really need to pay somebody else to do it. There are tons of times when I believe in using an expert consultant to supplement my own business or to bring skills and experience that I haven't got. But on this one, I just think it's so integral, so fundamental to what you do that chief exec's got to lead it and do it with the top team.
I mean, what you're saying is exactly what the conversation we had on the podcast, and we were talking about the fact that if there's one element of external consultancy that's potentially useful when it comes to strategy, is it's somebody helping you ask the right questions. But in terms of actual knowledge, if the management team within the business doesn't have that understanding of the business, then there's a real problem that a management consultant supporting with strategy isn't going to be able to resolve. I I am not surprised. I'm pleased to hear actually that you guys are doing it yourselves, because I think that's the way it should be. It's got to have ownership internally as well, right?
Got to have ownership, and yeah, you're right. I mean, you need to have the most profound understanding within the team, and if you haven't got that, then something's terribly wrong. There's a huge value in external facilitation. I mean, I've just done a strategy exercise where, for obvious reasons, everything had to be done remotely, where we'd normally all be in a room, and that's quite complex to choreograph. So I got a specialist digital facilitator to help us kind of so that nobody noticed the process, if you like, at least of all, so that I could focus on what was going on rather than the techniques and the whiteboards and God knows what that we were using online. So I think there's a huge value in that. And then also at my new place, we needed some brand identity guidelines, and we haven't got a marketing specialist. So of course I brought in consultancy expertise. Of course I want an expert to do that.
Yeah. We'll get on to that. So I don't want to rant at you.
I've messed up the running order.
How dare you, this really strict itinerary that I'm following here. I wanted to talk still about Eden then on the marketing and the brand side of things. So locally, was there a bit of a brand issue when you arrived?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, nationally, even internationally, Eden is a much loved and respected brand, and it should be, because it's transformational in what it's done. Within Cornwall, there was a mixed view of Eden. I think, to put it kindly, I think there'd been quite a bit of a wake up call when Eden got into financial difficulties, and the wake up call was just that Cornwall, in general, didn't sort of pile into the rescue. And I mean, we always say, I remember Tim Smith saying it was kind of as though we behaved like an unruly teenager at times, and we'd not been great. Perhaps we'd not shown our gratitude and appreciation for what we were, for the support that we had in the early days. And we'd also not done as good a job as we should have done of talking about what it was, what not only what Cornwall was contributing to Eden, but what Eden had contributed to Cornwall, because actually it's pretty amazing. It's over 2 billion quid into the local economy, and it's a couple of thousand jobs that wouldn't otherwise exist. And of course, the crucial thing was Eden was open all year round, and financially that's not necessarily the most sensible thing, but it's really important to support the diversification of the Cornish economy. So I think we were doing good stuff, but we hadn't necessarily conveyed it in a way that had won us friends. And so our job early on was to rebuild some relationships, and I had a fantastically good top team, and people on that team contributed a lot by appearing at things, rocking up at other people's events, or serving on boards of governors of schools, or boards of other organizations, and just kind of making sure that we were as plugged in as we could be to the wider Cornish, not just economy, but society, and and conveying who we were in that way. I wouldn't want to overstate it, but it does take a while to, I guess, get to the point where we felt Cornwall had fallen back in love with us, and that's really important. I mean, it's important because you want the people who are working there to really feel as proud as they should do. I mean, you should feel proud of working at Eden. It's a fantastic place, and you didn't want them to be getting a hard time when they were out and about. But also, Eden depends on getting really good word of mouth from every taxi driver or hairdresser or whatever who's ever bumping into a tourist, or every B&B owner or hotelier. You want them to really, really, really like Eden. So they say the stuff that makes that marginal difference as to whether people come and visit, join, buy a pasty, whatever. It's really important to have a positive vibe around the place.
Was when you first arrived, was there like an experience issue, or was that kind of nailed, and the customer experience and that was all great, and there was almost like the periphery, or was at the core of it, was that like part of the problem? Because obviously from a marketing perspective, that can be very troublesome.
Yeah, I think there was a fundamental and really, actually rather saddening point about the visitor experience, which is that, as you will know, my view is that the core visitor experience of going to the largest rainforest in captivity, that alone is such a wow. That should be everything you need. But it wasn't. And the truth is 91% of people who come to Cornwall on holiday have been to Cornwall on holiday before.
Yeah.
A lot of people would see Eden as a bucket list visit. So they think if they've done it, they've done it. Mm. And that's, that financially, that's really, really difficult. So even though, to my mind, it should be quite enough that you've got a rainforest in a bubble, actually what we needed to do was activate it with more stuff going on around it. And it was to oversimplify, essentially what we did was we took a diary that had 14 events a year in it, and we made it a diary that had 28 events a year in it. So we reached a point where there weren't many weekends where there was nothing going on. And what was included in that was moving the summer program from something that was really good, but not terribly newsworthy, to a program of blockbusters. So we did dinosaurs, and we did space, and then we did global extinction and loss of biodiversity, but we did it in a box office way. So we were having these, blockbusters that were really drawing in huge numbers in the summer, and then pretty much the whole of the rest of the year there was some extra reason for you to come to Eden. Even if you'd been a week before, there was going to be this other thing going on. And add into that stuff like the Eden sessions, which of course mean that lots of people would come to a gig who perhaps maybe coming to Eden wouldn't be their top of their list, but the gig gives them a reason to come, and they think, oh wow, and they've got a ticket that lets them back in the next day. Anyway, all of that meant that we turned around what was a gradual but long-term decline in visitor numbers, and we put a load of visitor numbers on, and we got a really good uptick in the numbers. And the difference was the extra visitors, they were repeats, they were local people coming again and again. It wasn't and that's a hard way to make your money, because they're paying less. They've got a locals pass, or they're coming at quieter times of year, whatever. But actually it's immensely valuable, partly to go back to in a sort of the circle of the conversation. Partly it's valuable because that's loads of local people who we really want to be in love with Eden, and you just got them in, and you scared their children with a dinosaur, whatever. You gave them a fun thing, and now they're thinking, yeah, I should, that's great that I came back, because we kept bumping into people who'd only come in the early days, and you want them coming again and again.
Were you responsible for the zip wire?
No, zip wire was already there when I arrived. I was responsible going on the zip wire many times, but
where's Gordon? Oh, he's on the zip wire again,
screaming above the Biomes again.
Yeah. I think what you also did in with all of those activities is create a gift for marketing, in the sense that content of communication, that's one of the hardest things, isn't it? Is if you've got nothing to say, what the hell do you say? Whereas if you provide a marketing team with a load of stuff that's going on, it's lovely and circular.
Yeah, I mean, a tricky thing that we caused, because we had a fantastic marketing team, brilliant marketing director, but actually at times it was quite hard, because there was a bit of a crowd of things that wanted talking about. We remember when we invested in the core proposition, if you like, so the day-to-day visit, with things like revivifying the core building and putting the giant sculpture in it called Infinity Blue that blows smoke rings all day long. Actually, I mean, that was a massive investment and a massive statement around art being part of the way we convey science. But actually, it had to be fitted into a whole schedule of other events that we were talking about. It's actually, it's quite tricky for the marketing team to stay on top of the amount of stuff that we had. But I think they did a bang up job, and certainly, wherever you were in Cornwall, if you would, you'd see the bus shelter signs or the great 48 sheets outside Truro Station or whatever, and you would know what we were up to, and that was really important. And by the way, we were very, very much focusing our advertising presence within the peninsula. So we decided that, for bangs per buck, we weren't going to be the ones up country trying to persuade people to come to Cornwall, because Cornwall does that very well. What we were going to do was try and make sure that if you were in the West Country, or if you're in Cornwall for your holiday, you would make damn sure that you set aside a day to come to Eden.
Yeah, I've been in that position before with the Cornwall problem, and you think, hang on, it's not our problem. we don't. That's somebody else is dealing with that.
Well, there's 4 million people a year coming to Cornwall, for day trips or summer holidays. So that's a now, admittedly, they're mostly repeat visitors, but that's a reasonable number of people. That's a reasonable sized pond to fish in. So actually catching them with things like, we put our advertising up in the loos on the motorway service stations, for example, on the way down the M5 and A30. It's catching people and making sure that in their week they will invest a day at Eden.
Yeah, and it worked well, because you had crazy visitor numbers, didn't you?
Typically, the summer 6 weeks, we'd be getting as many as 250,000 people through the door during that period, and it's incredibly spiky. It's very much weather driven. People see Eden as an indoor attraction, even though actually most of it is outdoors. So on a rainy day in the summer, you can have over 11,000 people in, whereas on an inclement day in the winter, you can be down around 300 or 400. So that's quite a spread to try and staff for.
I think you once said to me, if you want to go to Eden in the summer, make sure it's a sunny Sunday.
It's just the most glorious place to be in the summer, in the sunshine. You'll have much more space there. You'll get much more chance to enjoy it, and most of it's outdoors anyway. So what nicer place to be.
Back slightly to the customer service question. Did you you might not know the answer to this, but did you put a lot of metrics benchmarking in terms of watching the improvement? No doubt you benchmarked and measured a lot of visitor numbers, but were you looking at customer satisfaction as one of those metrics?
Yes, there's quite a program of there's a number of things actually, as simple as those little faces that you bang your hand on the way out to say how satisfied you've been. Obviously that's pretty unsophisticated, but it does give you a trend. To interview programs. So 8 times a year, there are members of the Eden team out interviewing very significant number of visitors, quite a detailed way, and we obviously supplement that during major programs like the summer season. To get people's takes. We wanted to know how good their experience was, but also some fairly specific stuff, around whether they would recommend it, whether they would come back again for the same thing, different thing. But also crucially, not only the entertainment value, but the educational value, because Eden is an educational place. And if all we did was give people a good time, well, that's valuable, but that's not the point of Eden. You want people to subliminally take in information and be able to behave in a way that's really good for the planet because of the stuff that they've learned or been influenced by when they're on the site. Otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah. One more question, I think, on Eden, unless something else comes to me. I saw that Falmouth University's, and I don't know if this was, I think this was during your time, data duopoly.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. I'm really interested in this tech element to help operationally, but also, you know, marketing wise. It developed to help queue management, right?
Yeah, it's so at Falmouth University, there's a brilliant unit called the Launchpad, and the Launchpad kicks off new businesses, and you have fantastic, I think, recent graduates who dream up business ventures and are then looking for partners. And we were lucky enough to partner with the it's Erin and Tanuvi from Data Duopoly for their piece of work. They created an app which would help you manage people around the site. So it would help people pinpoint precisely where they were, so they could figure out what they wanted to see next. But it would also guide them as to where there was next opportunity to buy an ice cream, whatever. Where's there the next educational experience? And clearly that also equips you as the venue with a load of information about how people are accessing the site, how people are enjoying the site, and you know which bits are working and which bits aren't. There are challenges with it, as your signal isn't always fantastic when you're in a biome in the bottom of a clay quarry in Cornwall. But I thought it was fascinating, and I know that since my time, I know Data Duopoly are going from strength to strength. Funny enough, on Twitter today, I just spotted that they've been named yet again as one of the most promising tech startups, and I'm sure they will. I really do believe that they will come to influence the way that visitor attractions work.
It really it was something that I really sparked an interest for me, because I just particularly with somewhere like Eden, where you've said that there were things like the biomes obviously must be an area where you are going to get bottlenecked, and so I'd read that they can do things like ping to say, I don't know, discount on coffee now or whatever, so that you can try and move people away or get them to other areas. And particularly the experience in Cornwall over the last few years, where there has been negative press around far too many people in certain places, it could be really interesting, couldn't it?
Certainly could. I prefer the side of it that's a bit less transactional, and that finds that you happen to be standing by this tree in the Mediterranean biome, and the app will tell you a bit about that tree, why it's important to people, what fruits it produces, whether it's threatened or what. I just think it's an amazing educational tool that adds value to your experience, and crucially for visitor attractions, it adds value without there being signs all over the place. Yeah. And there's nothing that takes away the magic of being in a rainforest more than having a load of signs up to tell you what you're looking at. But if you can take that away and just put it on a device, then so much the better. And I do think that has resonances for all sorts of, not just visitor attractions, actually.
Yeah, for sure. And then, so from Eden, you've joined a startup charity.
Yeah, time for a new adventure.
Yeah, and Creative Land Trust sounds like a fantastic adventure. Firstly, though, my curiosity is around how have you found a real shock, the change going from established organisation to startup? Have you loved it? Did you not even notice?
Yeah, I've certainly noticed. I do love it, but it is a shock, because you come up with an idea for something that you think, oh, it'd be good if we did that, and then you look around and think, oh, okay, that's me then. Because there isn't anybody to. Yeah, there's nobody to chuck the job to. So I had never done a startup. In all the many jobs I'd never done a startup, and that was a part of the appeal. And it has been an absolute joy recruiting the entire team, which sounds very grand. There's only 5 of us, but we've recruited everybody. We've done it during lockdown. So we've recruited without actually meeting people, and then we've done team building without actually meeting people. We've actually only all been in the same room as a team once
That's crazy.
and I joined in April, so that's in best part of 9 months. That's the only time we've all been together. But it's working a treat, and it's completely fascinating doing and energizing actually doing a startup.
What's the mission?
So we are there to solve a problem that global cities face, which is that you get a difficult part of town, and the only people who will move into it are the artists and creatives, and they will make it a really happening and fun part of town. And as a result, people will move in, business will move in, prices will go up, and the artists get driven out. And that's happened since God was a boy. But the thing that's changed in the last decade is that there aren't any cheap bits of London, and I'm working specifically in London at the moment. There aren't any really cheap bits for the artists to move to. So where they used to move to another cheap bit of town, now they're moving to Dublin or Berlin or Margate or Hastings. And does that matter? Well, it does matter, because the reason, one of the key reasons that London is successful as a global city is creativity of its population. The arts and culture that bring people from all over the world, that make it, for example, as a financial centre, it's much more appealing than some other cities we could mention, because it's got all that, and it mustn't lose that. So the Mayor of London and the Arts Council and a charitable organisation called Bloomberg got together and put together the launch funding to get us up and running, with the idea being that we fix this problem, and we fix it by securing long-term, affordable workspace for artists and creatives all over London. So we need, over 5 years, we need to secure enough buildings to house about 1,000 studios. That's the target, and we've got to do all that way below market prices, because at market prices artists can't afford to take the space. So we need to come up with a new blended funding model that enables us to do that.
It's so fascinating. So from a marketing perspective, branding perspective, you've got to do that without anybody knowing who you are. So presumably you are, that's a core objective for you guys, is brand building pretty quickly.
Yeah, we are pretty much unknown, and we are blessed with a name which I inherited, but Creative Land Trust. It kind of sounds as though we've been there for 100 years, and really worthy bunch. And I like the fact it's got the word trust in the title, because we are going to hold buildings and land in trust forever. So that's quite helpful. I mean, one value of the brand as it gets out there is that a lot of the time, developers, property owners, councils would quite like there to be creatives working in their buildings, but they don't really know where to go. And they look at a universe of 250 studio providers, and they don't know who's good, who's bad, who's indifferent. They don't know which ones will be there next week. But we sound pretty solid, and we've got the Mayor of London and the Arts Council behind us. So we're pretty trustworthy, and we know the sector, we know the universe of studio providers. So then once we secure a building, we although we'll go out to tender in general, but we'll know who is going to be best placed to serve that place well and help the developers make a successful place, make a successful neighborhood with happy residents, people who want to move in, other businesses co-locating.
From a brand perspective, what do you guys see as your early priorities on this stuff? So, are you doing quite a lot of lobbying?
We're just starting to do lobbying work, but my view is we need a track record of successful ownership and management of buildings before we have credibility as an advocacy organization. And also, there are plenty of good voices in the arts sector, and we haven't come along to dominate that space. So the first job for us is demonstrating basic credibility in our core operations. Acquire some buildings, run them really well, and then people might be interested in what we've got to say. But there is a bunch of marketing work to be done behind that. So it's all very well that we've got a name that works quite well, but we've had to set up. We had to commission some work to give us brand identity guidelines, because we had acquired, I think, actually a brilliant logo. One of our trustees had sorted for us to have a logo design. I really like our logo, but we didn't actually have all the rest of the stuff that goes with that. So when commissioning, for example, leaflets or our website, we're
do what you
winging
want.
it. Yeah. So, and I'm not very comfortable with that. So we've had some brilliant work done on brand identity guidelines. So we now have a very comprehensive. We've just completed it actually. We've got really comprehensive explanation of how we or you as a partner use our brand, how we convey ourselves, and that's from things as as small as our social media presence, right up to when we buy a building, it's going to have hoardings around it. They're going to be quite big. That's an opportunity to present ourselves. So what's that going to look like? And when a building is there, it's going to have a sign on the door. What's that going to look like? Because we're hoping it's going to be there forever. So that's been a big chunk of work. The social media presence has been important, because as a small organization and a startup, if we want to carry any weight at all, we need to establish a presence there. And we're a small team as well, so we had to think carefully about which channels do we emphasize? How do we partner up with people to get our brand out there on social media channels? And when we say something, it needs to mean something. It needs to matter. And then our website, which I don't think reflected terribly well on us. And as that's as diplomatically as I can put it, and is mid redesign as we speak, and I hope will reappear early in the new year. It is new year, early this year. Looking rather different and much more user friendly. Just as basic at the moment. If you click onto our website and you want an introduction to us, you've then got to click into a PDF or click into a video. It doesn't, you've actually really got to make quite an effort to find out who we are. And so that is, I think, suboptimal.
It's such an exciting opportunity when you've got a startup, because on the one hand you think, oh my God, I could do literally anything from a marketing whatever perspective, but then on the other hand, it's a lot easier to say, okay, how are we going to build this, as opposed to ending up in a business where you think, okay, we're going to cut a lot of stuff out. You can really shape it really authentically, can't you? With a small team as well, like you guys are all so close to it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I'm loving. We're really close to it. We have to be honest with ourselves about what we can and can't do, because there's a lot of buildings in London, and we could spend a lot of time running around the place, like magpies distracted by every shiny thing. Well, that won't do, because we haven't got time to do that. So we have we coordinate our efforts a lot. We talk to each other a lot to make sure that we're all aligned on stuff like that. But it's also quite exciting, because it's lovely working in teams. And sometimes it's lovely when you know that you as a gang are responsible. You're genuinely responsible. If it goes well, it was you, and if it goes badly, it was you. And there's only we are a small band at the moment, and we know that, and we feel it. And I think we all find it really motivating that our efforts, for good or ill, they're not hidden.
No. It's exciting. I can't wait to see how it's going to evolve. I think it's a great project, and I think that you guys are going to do a cracking job on it. One of the things I wanted to bother you quickly with before I let you go is I couldn't help but notice that you did an MBA, and didn't see that coming, did ya?
No, I didn't. No, because I did it in the late 19th century, so I really wasn't expecting.
Wasn't it 2011?
Yes, yeah, quite. I don't know what year it was. I can't remember. I have got an MBA.
So I'm really curious, actually, because they get such. So I know, I appreciate it was a while ago now, but they get mixed feedback, and I'm interested in. So, what motivated you to do it, and also what your experience was?
Okay. So I did mine at Henley Business School, or Management College as it was then. What motivated me to do it was I was missing learning. I was actually back at WH Smith Group at the time, and I missed academic stuff, and I wanted to spend some time learning. And I thought, well, I'm serious about business. I'm serious about my career, so this would be a good thing to learn. And I absolutely respect the view that it's not as valuable as the School of Hard Knocks or whatever. I think there's an awful lot to that. Actually, life experience is more valuable than an MBA. However, I guess two things. One is it equips you, or it has equipped me, with some tools that are valuable. So I don't waste time when doing things like writing a business case, wondering how to write a business case, or wondering what the headings are. And you get these tedious models, 7 of this and 5 of that and 6 of the other, but actually they are helpful for remembering and making sure that you cover everything in a subject. So I think that's of real value. When you do it, you're learning a load of case studies, and that's interesting stories that might be relevant. I studied alongside some other people, and so you get a bit of a network. So that's quite helpful too. But the biggest one for me was I wouldn't have got the job at English Heritage if I hadn't got an MBA. The reason being simply that my CV didn't look like the next commercial director of English Heritage. I was a bit of a left field candidate. The only reason I got an interview was that I had this thing that gave me some credibility coming in from my WH Smith Waterstones career, and it got me the interview, and I obviously did a decent job at the interview and went into the job. So for some people it is a source of perhaps formal credibility that you wouldn't otherwise have. That might not be a good thing, but that was the case for me.
There's definitely some value, isn't there, in having foundations, whether or not MBA or whether or not, in marketing terms, you can do things with the Chartered Institute of Marketing, whether or not you can learn from how to do marketing and how to run businesses from a course is questionable. But in terms of the foundations that they provide from theory and from, like you say, just trust, I suppose, it's valuable in that sense.
Well, it's not a substitute for common sense, but it is a valuable supplement to common sense, I think. Having both is helpful.
The vitamin C of common sense. And so would you say the MBA as well? So you've done a lot of leading through change, so whether or not you call it turnaround, whether or not you call some of it sort of change, is that something that you feel has helped you, or do you feel like actually it was then the career progress that is more that gave you that insight?
I think it's kind of unavoidable. It's like being a football manager in that you almost never get the opportunity to take over a club that's doing fantastically well. Generally, there's a reason why you get invited into whatever job it is, chief exec or whatever job it is. So you're going to be leading through change anyway. But as it happens, I think, just for reasons of intellectual curiosity, I wouldn't want to go somewhere where there wasn't a load of change to be done. That would be dull.
What do you think makes a good leader? Last question, and then I'll let you go.
Oh, well, that's a massive last question.
I'm trying to keep you.
I think actually 21st century leadership is, or should be, a bit different to what's gone before. And that's partly because we've learned some stuff about what doesn't work. The old hero, always a man, leader, making a lot of noise, getting a load of press, the Branson model, that's had its day, or I really hope it's had its day. Actually, millennials are a wonderful generation to work with and to lead, and they certainly expect a very different model of leadership, which is more humble and empowering and facilitating for others, much more listening, much more supporting. So the leader's job is, this isn't anything brilliant from me. This is an old Tom Peters thing, but I think it's right. Leader's job essentially is make sure you've got the right people. That, by the way, is harder than it sounds. Then point them all in roughly the right direction, and then get the obstacles out of their way. Because if you've got the right people and you've got them going in the right direction, the only help they really need is getting the obstacles out of the way. The obstacle might be lack of clarity about what the direction is or whatever. But anyway, that's your job as a leader, is supporting other people to achieve. You don't need to be the big I am about it. I mean, that I am not one for having quotes up on the wall that I don't like, but there is one that has influenced me a lot, and it's Harry S. Truman, who I think was the greatest of American presidents, perhaps. And he said, "It's amazing what can be achieved if you don't care who gets the credit." And I think that's powerful and perhaps not always respected enough. But anyway, that's what I think a good leader looks like.
Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and experience with us. It's been great to chat to you, and there are lots of little gems of knowledge that you've left people with there.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to bang on for a while.
Anytime. Thanks, Gordon.
You've been listening to Katie Sando interviewing Gordon Seabright from the Creative Land Trust on the Marketing Forum podcast. And you can hear more podcasts from the Marketing Forum soon. In the next episode, we have a recording from a live webinar with Lucy Alexander, Head of Insight from the Financial Times. We cover what insight means, how even small businesses can make more of data and insights, and she throws us some incredible statistics around where insights have massively informed the business plans for the Financial Times. In the meantime, please do like, subscribe, and share. Thank you very much.